Well, good morning, everyone. As we wait for the latecomers to get here and pretend that they're not late. If you would, get your class book and turn to page 9. That's beginning today. As a review, when I taught about a week and a half ago, because I was gone for a little bit, maybe not that long. Went with my dad and my brother to visit his mother's grave down in Georgia, if you didn't know why I was gone. He's 86 years old and wanted to go, so we went. Last class that I taught, we spoke about how providence has two aspects. One is the purpose of God, and, which is God's love. And the other one is the plan of God. Now, the purpose of God will involve all of the omni traits because He is, omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, and omni-everything that is good, you could say. The plan of God, we talked about how it has self-imposed limits that God put on Himself. For example, the most obvious answer is God limited Himself when He gave mankind free will. When He gave us free will, then God could not, by His own limitation, force people to believe or not believe, which, if you think about it, is contrary to Calvinism, isn't it? Calvinism doesn't really believe in free will. They believe that we all have a depraved will, which means that we are not free except free to choose evil, which to me is not really free, but that is how one Reformed Calvinist explained it to me. Yes, we have free will. We're just not free to choose good. We're only free to choose evil. So that's not much of a freedom. But because I do believe that God gave us free will, then God did limit Himself, which is something I think is important for us to remember when we think about God's providence. Now, on page 9, we're going to talk about difficult areas concerning the concept of providence involving the purpose of God and the plan of God. So, you've heard me say these three phrases many times in the last 3.5 years. I don't know. I'm not God. Deal with it. Okay. So we're going to be looking at some things that we're going to be able to freely say, I don't know. I'm not God. And we're going to have to deal with it. How we deal with possible providence within our lives. I know that Jared did his class when he taught for me that Wednesday night on that. Okay, on page 9, two extremely difficult questions concerning providence are double agency and theodicy. On theodicy, when I first got here, for whatever reason, we studied for a quarter the problem of evil. And that was something I greatly enjoyed, and I hope that if you didn't enjoy it, at least you got some benefit out of it. Double agency is, how does God act while preserving man's free will? Repeat after me. I don't know. I'm not God. Deal with it. You will hear me say that often, and because there's a lot of things I don't know. Now, I will give some guesses, but guesses aren't necessarily facts, but I think that we can find some comfort in having possible ideas that are biblical. Now, as we said, providence with emphasis on the book of Acts, we're going to see this idea of double agency and even theodicy within the book of Acts. We'll get to it a little bit later on. I will reiterate a quote from Robert Turner at the bottom of page 9. I know nothing of the modus operandi of God, except as revealed in His Word, whereby I believe or trust in Him. When he says, I know nothing of the modus operandi of God, what is he saying? Repeat after me. I don't know. And there's a lot we don't know. And some people are uncomfortable in saying that they don't know. Okay, let me ask you this question. Do you know more than what you don't know? I think most of us would say we don't know more than what we do know. It's like, for example, I know what I'm about to ask you. None of you know. And what I'm about to ask you is, how many of you can read other people's minds? You can get hints and things like that, but it's like sometimes people say, well, that's not what I was thinking you were thinking. And when we do guess, it's a guess, it's got hints, it maybe has some reasons, but we spend most of our life not knowing. How many of you know what's going to happen tomorrow? You don't? Because what could happen to tomorrow that could ruin all of our plans? You could die, or Jesus could return. Okay? How many of you know when Jesus is going to return? We spend most of our life not knowing more than we know. We should become comfortable in being able to say, I don't know. Yes, Frank.
Romans 11:33. Oh, the depth and the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are His ways, His judgments, and His ways past finding out.
Yep. Absolutely. So let's look at this double agency. The concept of how does God act while preserving free will? We see examples in the Bible, and I'm going to give you, based upon those examples, my theory on how God can act providentially within history without removing my free will. And that is that I often believe, because God does not control people and make them do certain things, God can control situations to encourage people to do certain things. We'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But let's change the situation. Before you lead the horse to water, he's worked hard, pulling the plow. Then you lead that horse that's been working all day to water. You can't make him drink, but what's the chances he's going to drink? Much higher, because he's thirsty from the situation. You're still not making him drink. If he doesn't drink, he's what? Stupid. Thank you very much. Does stupid ever describe human beings? Often. In fact, the word stupid is often found in the book of Jeremiah. And it's not a term, when we were growing up, we told our kids, you don't call people stupid and you don't call them dumb. Okay. But one day, our two girls came into my office, which was in my bedroom. Janet was at work, and I was at work. And they had two friends over from the neighborhood, and they were playing. And Rachel, the oldest, said, "Papa, can we tell them the D word and the S word that you will not allow us to say?" And I'm thinking, okay, well, they're probably not going to hear this at home because their parents probably cuss. I said, "Yes, you can tell them. Go ahead." I said, "We don't say dumb and we don't say stupid." And I went, phew, I thought it was two other words that began with D and began with S. But even though you want to raise your children not to be impolite, it is still a fact that some people can act stupidly, just like a horse can act stupidly. I believe that God controls situations, manipulates situations. You'll probably hear me use that word manipulate a lot. I don't mean it in a bad way. When we think of somebody being manipulated, we think of, scheming, yes. Nefarious reasons. Think of controls. But if you go to a chiropractor, what does the chiropractor do? Manipulate your bones. Okay, so manipulation can have a positive meaning also. So you hear me use the word manipulate, and I'll probably put it in quotes because I don't mean it in a bad way at all. Joseph in the Old Testament is a prime example. Genesis chapter 45, 5 through 8. An extremely interesting question is aroused by Joseph not blaming his brothers. Although God does not control minds and hearts in reference to salvation issues, this is where I don't know. Does God ever control somebody in non-salvific areas, such as maybe Joseph's brothers? Repeat after me. I don't know. I really don't. I do know God does not take away somebody's free will in order to save them, because that's found throughout the Bible that we choose freely. But how God manipulates scenarios, situations, and even people is beyond my ability to understand. I'm not God. I deal with it by realizing what I can know and what I cannot know. And so we don't know how much was involved in Joseph's brothers and what they did to Joseph, but we do know in the end, he said that, what? God did this, not you. Now, I believe that he was probably informed by God in order for him to know. In other words, how would he know that God did this and not them? But we see in Acts chapter 2 this concept of this double agency, God acting or manipulation within time and our free will, and even the problem of evil in Acts chapter 2 and verse 23. You see this in the middle of page 10. This man, delivered over by the predetermined plan, remember that was one of the subcategories of providence, plan and purpose. Okay? By the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. So, who put Jesus to death? I hear God, I hear man, both. How was God involved in this? He allowed it. His plan, was it a very specific plan? Very much so. Was crucifixion always within the plan? Yeah, we see that from Psalm 22. How does God go about with making this predetermined plan without taking away the free will of people? Yes.
He manipulated the hearts and minds of men, their desires,
he worked on the situation is what you're saying. Yeah. I understand what you're saying, John, but to say that God can do it, I have no problem explaining how God can do it. That's where I would have to say, I don't know. Well, correct. But we're going to study it anyway. Frank.
Well, old-time preachers, and I guess I'm an old-time preacher because I'm old, but, you know, we affectionately refer to these kind of things as a scheme of redemption. And that's our get-out-of-jail-free card, biblically.
Yep.
And that's how you deal with the naysayers that you talk about encountering all the time, the students that don't know, the smart people that have been miseducated, that don't see the thread that runs through the Bible. I think it's insane, from my point of view, that God would call Saul, you know, to be an apostle to the Gentiles. But hey, I wasn't doing the hiring, you know. So, but it worked. It worked great. It was God's plan, and that just proves that His ways are past finding out.
They are. Did God hold the Jews and the Romans responsible for Jesus' death? Absolutely. So their free will was never taken. Now, if their free will was taken, then they would not be responsible. You don't hold somebody responsible if they have no free will about it. If somebody got pushed off a roof and landed on somebody and killed that person, the person who landed on them, could you say they killed them? Oh, they physically killed them. Are they responsible for that? Absolutely not. Because they had no free will in it. But the Romans and the Jews, they were responsible. How do we know they were responsible? Okay, they said to crucify them. How else do we know? Yes. Several times they tried to kill Jesus. How else do we know that they were held responsible? They need to repent. Acts chapter 2, verse 38. If they were not responsible, they would not need to repent. Now, how all of this works, I don't know. Does it work? Absolutely. Because God is the one that does this. I cannot even explain to you the foreknowledge of God perfectly. I give you theories, but I'm not sure I could explain it fully. I'd probably need to be omniscient in order to do that. There's a lot of things we don't understand, and that's okay. We find throughout the history of Jesus that he was presenting situations to the Pharisees to get to them, to make the free will choice, to want to put them to death. Would you say that's a fair statement? That Jesus put the Pharisees in many situations that would cause them to make the free will choice to want to put them to death? Healing somebody on the Sabbath. Would you say that healing people on the Sabbath only had one purpose? No. What were the purposes of healing on the Sabbath? Okay, to do good. What else?
Prove that he was God.
Prove he was God. What else?
To get his adversaries livid at him.
Get his adversaries livid at him. What else?
Glorify God.
Glorify God. What else?
To instruct the people.
To instruct the people about what?
Him being God, his power.
Okay. What else then? He can forgive sins. What else? He was teaching them the true meaning of the Sabbath. Okay? In the Old Testament, did they ever do something on the Sabbath day? Can you think of one example in the Bible where all of Israel, at least, all of Israel, maybe just the soldiers, but all of Israel did something on the Sabbath that was not resting? Very good, Jericho.
Because one of those 7 days had to be the seventh day. And they marched around. Was that the Sabbath, one of those 7 days? Absolutely. Were they resting? No. But what were they doing?
God's plan.
Yeah, God's plan. They were obeying God.
So we just came up with 5, 6, 7 reasons why Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And one of them was to make his adversaries livid at him. If you look at the bottom of page 10, Jesus speaks the truth about the Pharisees and scribes, calling them hypocrites, Matthew 23. Would that make them mad? Yep. Jesus reveals the truth about himself by pronouncing the paralytic's sins forgiven, Matthew 9. Would that cause them to be mad? Yep, it was. Jesus reveals the heart of the Pharisees by purposely healing on the Sabbath, Mark 3. Would that make them mad? Yes. Jesus picks as an apostle one whom he knew would betray him, and even allows him to handle the money, John 12. Who was that? Judas. People ask, did God make Judas betray Jesus? No. But did Jesus pick someone with the pre-knowledge of his character that he would be inclined to? Yes, situations. And then what did Jesus do? He didn't just pick them. Told him to do what he had to do. And when he picked them, what responsibility did he give them? Carrying the bag of money. Do you think Jesus knew that he was pilfering? Of course he knew. But he allowed him to do it.
Tax collectors, they were like the most, they were like 80 tax collectors. They were, you know, they could have done it too.
So she asked, why did he not pick the tax collector? Repeat after me. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. That is a good question. And at the one of the greatest acts of forgiveness, even before the act, was in the upper room. What did Jesus do to all 12 apostles? Wash their feet. Yep. Okay. You've heard, this is now the connection between providence and faith. I'm going to suggest to you, we're not going to get in a long discussion about this. Feel free to argue with me if you feel the situational necessity. We often use, what was that? Yes, I am. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor your ways, my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Many people will turn to that verse and say, this just shows that sometimes we can't understand God. I suggest to you contextually that is not actually the interpretation. That might be an application, but it's not the interpretation. The reason is what is beyond our ways that's in Isaiah 55 is, you look at verse 7, let the wicked forsake his ways and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. That's the verse that precedes right before verses 8 and 9. And also within this context, the thoughts and ways of God that are not man's are grace, verse 1, and faithfulness, verses 10 through 13. So when it says, Your thoughts are not our thoughts, and your ways are not our ways. It's really about God is far more gracious than we are. God is far more faithful than we are. God is far more willing to forgive than we are. I think a better verse for us not understanding God's ways is found in Habakkuk 1, verse 5. Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. What was it that God tells Habakkuk that he would not believe if he was told? Habakkuk begins with a question by, maybe even an accusation by Habakkuk to God, saying, how can you watch all of this evil and not do anything about it? That is correct. Why is God's choice of the Babylonians not understandable to Habakkuk?
Yeah.
How can you use those that are more wicked to enact your justice on those that are less wicked? God tells Habakkuk what he's about to do. He says, if I tell you, you won't believe it, I'm going to tell you. In chapter 2, Habakkuk says, basically, you're right, I don't understand it. And we have within Habakkuk a phrase that is introduced in chapter 2 and verse 4. But the righteous will live by his faith. And that is a phrase that is quoted in Romans, Galatians, and in Hebrews. So it's a pretty important statement. The end of the book of Habakkuk, he is trembling. But he's living by faith. Does living by faith mean that you agree with everything that God decides? No. He didn't. Did not make any sense to him whatsoever. When he is waiting for God to do what God said he did, he accepted it. He did not like it. He did not understand it. The phrase, the righteous shall live by their faith, in Habakkuk, and then applied in Romans and Galatians and Hebrews, shows that God can act in his purpose and plan within our world, and we not understand, even if he explains it to us, because he is pure, he is higher, he is more loving, he is more forgiving, he is more just, he is more everything that is good than we are. The righteous shall live by their faith simply means I'm going to put my trust in God even when I don't understand. That's Habakkuk. That's a pretty good way to live, isn't it? Because I will ask you again, how many of you know more than you don't know? None of us. Does that include God's actions in our lives? Yes. Therefore, we have to live by faith, providentially, sometimes even trembling with fear because we don't understand. But we have to live through what God providentially will happen as he manipulates scenarios and situations to reward or punish people for their free will choices. And sometimes even the innocent, such as Habakkuk, will suffer the consequences of those being punished. Is that fair? Not my book. But the righteous shall live by faith, not whether or not I agree with what God has done. Is that easy or hard to do? can be real hard. It really can be. Because there's one thing that is hard for us to not do, but every single one of us wants to. It begins with the word, or begins with the letter C, and ends with the letter L. Okay, I'll give you control, yes. We want to control. Okay, raise your hand if you ever tried to control somebody. Yep. Raise your hand if you've ever tried to control God. I will raise my hand on that one. Yep. You don't know. That works. That works. Bargain with God. Well, was Abraham trying to control God when he was bargaining with him about the destruction of Sodom? Yeah. He was. You might not like the word control, but he was. It's like, okay, God, how about this? I'm going to try to change your mind on this, God. And that's where a racial slur came from that describes Jews nowadays. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it goes back to Abraham bargaining with God. No, but I think that sometimes people have said, okay, God, if you do this, or then I'll do that. Or if I will do this, then God, yeah, I want you to do that. And bargaining is a sense of control. Nope. God worked with them. God worked with them, which is amazing. Nope. Yep. Nope, there is a time and place for control. And self-control, too. On page 12, there's a quote from Derek Thomas. Providence is not an acknowledgement that we can make sense of what God is doing. It is an acknowledgement that He can make sense of it, and that is all that matters. We are not called upon to explain providence, but rather to trust the God of providence. I really like that. If you read Alan's latest report, you will again see providence. So we'll have to thank Alan when he gets back for contributing to the class, whether it was comfortable for him or uncomfortable for him. But he has been experiencing God's providence in India in helping spread the gospel and keeping people safe, including himself. Okay, anybody got any questions, comments, or disagreements before we go to page 13? Okay, this is something of a lengthy read. I want to read it to you. But it does combine theodicy, the problem of evil, with double agency, God interacting within people's lives without removing their free will. Okay, page 13. Sometimes we forget what really is important. This will give you cold chills, but puts life into perspective. At a fundraising dinner for a school that serves learning disabled children, the father of one of the school's students delivered a speech that would never be forgotten by all who attended. After extolling the school and its dedicated staff, he offered a question. Everything God does is done with perfection. Yet my son Shay cannot learn things as other children do. He cannot understand things as other children do. Where is God's plan reflected in my son? The audience was stilled by the query. The father continued. I believe, the father answered, that when God brings a child like Shay into the world, an opportunity to realize the divine plan presents itself, and it comes in the way people treat that child. Then he told the following story. Shay and his father had walked past a park where some boys Shay knew were playing baseball. Shay asked, do you think they will let me play? Shay's father knew that most boys would not want him on their team, but the father understood that if his son were allowed to play, it would give him a much-needed sense of belonging. Shay's father approached one of the boys on the field and asked if Shay could play. The boy looked around for guidance from his teammates. Getting none, he took matters into his own hands and said, we are losing by 6 runs, and the game is in the 8th inning. I guess he can be on our team, and we'll try to put him up to bat in the 9th inning. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Shay's team scored a few runs, but was still behind by 3. At the top of the 9th inning, Shay put on a glove and played in the outfield. Although no hits came his way, he was obviously ecstatic just to be on the field, grinning from ear to ear as his father waved to him from the stands. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Shay's team scored again. Now with 2 outs and bases loaded, the potential winning run was on base. Shay was scheduled to be the next at bat. Would the team actually let Shay bat at this juncture and give away their chance to win the game? Surprisingly, Shay was given the bat. Everyone knew that a hit was all but impossible because Shay didn't even know how to hold the bat properly, much less connect with the ball. However, as Shay stepped up to the plate, the pitcher moved a few steps to lob the ball in softly, so Shay could at least be able to make contact. The first pitch came, and Shay swung clumsily and missed. The pitcher again took a few steps forward to toss the ball softly towards Shay. As the pitch came in, Shay swung at the ball and hit a slow ground ball to the pitcher. The pitcher picked up the soft grounder and could easily have thrown the ball to the first baseman. Shay would have been out, and that would have ended the game. Instead, the pitcher took the ball and threw it on a high arc to right field, far beyond the reach of the first baseman. Everyone started yelling, Shay, run to first, run to first. Never in his life had Shay ever made it to first base. He scampered down the baseline, wide-eyed and startled. Everyone yelled, run to second, run to second. By the time Shay was rounding first base, the right fielder had the ball. He could have thrown the ball to second baseman for a tag, but the right fielder understood what the pitcher's intentions had been. So he threw the ball high and far over the third baseman's head. Shay ran towards second base as the runners ahead of him deliriously circled the bases towards home. As Shay reached second base, the opposing shortstop ran to him, turned him in the direction of third base, shouted, run to third. As Shay rounded third, the boys from both teams were screaming, Shay, run home. Shay ran home, stepped on home plate, and was cheered as a hero for hitting a grand slam and winning the game for his team. That day, said the father softly, with tears rolling down his face, the boys from both teams helped bring a piece of the divine plan into this world. What did all the players on both teams show? Compassion. Would they have shown compassion to anybody else on the other team? No. Somebody made this similar point years ago that I've never forgotten. And the point was, Why does God allow little children to suffer? Well, again, we can say, I don't know. We could say we live in a cursed world. God didn't cause this to happen. But we can also say this. Through God's providence, through situations, whether He caused them or not, God can enact His good, His plan. And when you have a little child that is sick or disabled, that is one of the easiest and most apt times for people to give up competitiveness and to learn compassion. And God wants to teach us compassion. And if we are ever in a situation where providentially we are not what we want to be, because who would choose their child to be disabled? Who would choose to be disabled or to have cancer? No one. But what we can do is we can try to use that situation for God to be glorified, for God to use that as part of His plan to teach compassion, mercy, love, togetherness, belonging, and all the good things that we so easily forget. Anybody got any questions or comments or disagreements? Yes.
There are children, babies, up to 6, 7 years old that are either born that way, or they had a severe injury to their brain. Ventilators, strokes, things like that. But some would cry and cry and cry, and then they have a tear that would come out, and not a sound would come out of their mouth. And I can tell you, I love their filled with. You can see God's goodness in the fact that people who come and help, the parents, how dedicated they were to the children. I mean, it brings out something in everybody that sees them. It'll bring out the true person that you are.
Yep. Just like Jesus' actions brought out the true nature of the Pharisees. Just like Joseph's position of favoritism brought out the true nature of his brothers. Anybody else? Okay, on Wednesday we're going to answer again. I know we're doing a lot of preparatory work, but hopefully we're doing some good
Foundational work. Why study this subject? We're studying it, we're learning definitions, we're seeing applications. You might be thinking, well, why should we study this? Be the first thing in the booklet. Well, if you were writing it, it might have been. But for whatever reason, when I wrote this, I think I wanted us to lay a foundation which I thought was important and helpful before we answer the question, why study this subject? Thank you very much.